In August 2009, the famous ufologist Timothy Good put me in touch with researcher Margaret Fry.
That they, about this Berwyn incident, because...
Margaret lives in North Wales, which has been a hotspot for UFO reports over decades. Margaret has investigated many of them, and in particular, the Berwyn Mountain case from 1974. I contacted Margaret, not realizing this introduction would mark the beginning of an incredible journey of discovery. The Berwyn UFO Cover Up. How can things which happen randomly in remote parts of Wales possibly be covered up by the authorities in London, you might ask? Well, the cover-up of certain information is only part of what the authorities have done. The main part, which is a term coined by researcher Andrew Johnson, is known as the muddle-up. Information which they cannot hide is simply muddled up rather than covered up. This is done with the help of shills who operate in our mainstream media and are particularly prominent when it comes to some UFO cases. This will become clear later in the film. Before I describe what took place in 1974, it's important to understand the geography of this dramatic location. The events centre around a small village called Llandrillo. The village is located at the foot of the Berwyn mountain range. The mountain peak overshadowing Llandrillo is called Bronwen. Let's just take a fly around Bronwen to get a feel for the incredible landscape surrounding this little village. Llandrillo sits at the end of a corridor of steep hills stretching southward. If we travel along this corridor, following the path of a tributary of the River Dee, 3 miles in a southerly direction, we approach the foot of another mountain peak, known as Berwyn, on the left. In this investigation, trying to uncover who saw what and when has been easily confused by the fact that many locations have poor visibility due to the terrain. In particular, Llandrillo itself has no visibility of where the events took place on the Berwyn mountain some 3 miles away. A group of 3 witnesses, Pat Evans and her 2 teenage daughters, provided compelling testimony describing a highly unusual object they witnessed when they pulled over on this road, the B4391. They viewed a glowing object for 10 minutes on the other side of the valley, seemingly resting on the side of the Berwyn mountain. The Evans family testimony was detailed and is considered to be very reliable. What is immediately clear from these 3D visuals is that people in Llandrillo and in the small holdings along the foot of the valley would have had no view of this object. Now that we have a feel for the landscape, let's move on to the events of 1974. 23rd of January 1974, Wednesday evening, 8:38 p.m. A large explosion was heard by local people, followed by an earth tremor. The earth tremor was so powerful that glasses fell from shelves in pubs in Bala. Bala is a small town 7 miles west of Llandrillo. The people of Llandrillo village came out into the streets to try and determine what had caused the explosion and subsequent earth tremor. Many of them used the local telephone box to report the incident to the police. A major incident was logged by the police, which describes the nature of the incident as an explosion. The log also shows that the police contacted air traffic controllers to determine whether military or civilian aircraft had been in the area. This indicates the police believed something may have crashed. People reported bright lights in the sky of various colours, one stating the lights were not like a meteorite.
A remote area of North Wales was shaken by a mysterious explosion during the night, and no one yet knows why.
One witness stated, "The loud bang I thought was a lorry coming off the A5 and hitting a house." Witnesses described a large glowing ball of light travelling overhead towards the Berwyn Mountains. These sightings were in the main shortly after the explosion and earth tremor had occurred.
It's a greenish blue colour. I was standing just by the police station there when he went just over there.
What was it? Was it a streak or a flash?
Yeah, it was a streak. It was just coming down.
Another significant point is that at this point in time, nobody thought the event was an earthquake. Neither the police nor the public thought an earthquake was the cause of this tremor.
The whole house was shaking, you know, trembling underneath somewhere.
What did you think was happening?
No idea what was happening. We were all stunned for a few seconds.
Claims of an earthquake were to come much later, which we will examine. After the explosion and tremor, some of the locals in Llandrillo reported to the police flashing lights on the side of the Bronwyn mountain.
The reason this village differs to all the others is because when people came out their houses here, wondering what was going on, some of them in this village saw lights above that ridge behind us.
In response to this, 4 police officers were dispatched up the mountain and conducted a foot search, suspecting a crashed aircraft. Witness Hugh Lloyd was 14 at the time and lived near the bottom of the Bronwyn mountain. On their way up the mountain, the police called at the Lloyd's farm and commandeered their 4-wheel drive Land Rover to help them in their search up Bronwyn. We retraced the police's tracks with researcher Scott Felden. We're 2/3 of the way up, and Scott's going to tell us what happened with the police when they got here.
Yeah. On the night of the 23rd of January, when the air tremor took place, local police and police from further afield came up this track with Hugh Lloyd in a commandeered Land Rover, which they got from his farm. And interestingly, these police in a small tight-knit community like this didn't know where to go. They didn't have a clue, and that in itself suggested the police weren't local. This particular area here, there was a few cars parked here at the time, and this house here, Blaenau Drewcha, there was a woman who's no longer with us anymore, Mrs. Williams. She actually received a letter, apparently from the Chief Constable, who would have been Gwynedd Constabulary at the time, thanking her for her hospitality, because with the police coming and going up here, she sort of fed and watered them, tea and biscuits, that sort of stuff, and the police were very thankful about that. Came up in the commandeered Land Rover. They came up here. Hugh Lloyd was driving it from the farm gate entrance up there onto the open fields. His neighbour, who was babysitting him that night, a guy who's dead now, called Enoch Davis, he drove it on the public section of the road and up here with all the police in the back. When they got on this stretch here, they found their way partially blocked by a vehicle. Obviously, looking at the state of the road, nothing's changed. The people who drove that vehicle never expected anything to happen, any other vehicles to come up, so they just left it willy-nilly. The vehicle, fortunately for the police, was unlocked, and they were able to move it out the way, but they lost about 10 minutes coming up this way. They didn't know who the van belonged to at the time, but they took the tax disc, an old trick apparently, for trying to get the owners to come forward, and obviously they would have questioned the owners to why they were up here in the first place. But that vehicle belonged to 4 lads, who all locals in the village, 4 brothers, who were out on the fields above us with a homemade lamp, hunting rabbits and hares. They were using a homemade device, a car battery, car headlamp, simple switch on and off, and you could get about an hour's burn time on that before the battery's dead and totally useless, and that's what they were using. They've been described as poachers in the past, but in fact they were actually operating up there with legitimate permission. I understand from what I've been told that they came down, they'd finished lamping, which does away with any idea that Pat Evans, 5 miles away, saw a poacher's lamp. The homemade device had long since died by 9 o'clock. She didn't even arrive till 10. But those lads, because the lamp had packed in, they'd come down through the trees, and surprise to them, they saw all these police hanging around their vehicle. And what they did was they basically hid in the trees. They were smaller then, a lot smaller, and they waited till the police went. They had no idea while the police had any interest in their vehicle. As soon as the police carried on up there, they got into their vehicle and disappeared that way. I was told the youngest one wasn't licensed to have a gun, and that's why they didn't want a confrontation with the police. We're at the top of the lane now, this track, coming up from Llandrillo. This is where the police came up in the commandeered Land Rover. From this point on, Hugh Lloyd took the steering wheel, although he was only 14, because he knew all this land, the farm tracks. He came through this gate and he went off in that direction. When these were doing this circular route, it's slightly higher ground there, so they could see over this rise here. The UFO was sat on the side of Cadair Berwyn, about 4 miles. The B4391, which actually runs through that valley over there in front of the snow, that's 5 miles. That's where Pat Evans was, if looking this way sort of. It was pitch black that night. They didn't see anything. They thought they were looking for a possible plane crash because of the poacher's lights down there. However, on their return journey, the only thing of note was that for a few seconds, probably no more than 10 seconds, in the direction of where the UFO was, there was a bright light lit up, if you like, a big luminescence, which came up and then receded to nothing. The guy who was in charge of the police, Hugh Lloyd, just said he was in charge, and he had pips, which on his epaulets, which presumably gave him some sort of rank. He exclaimed, "That's it," but then the light subsided, and then he convinced himself it was nothing other than just a glitch, if you like. And in fact, in documents, Pat Evans claims she saw headlamps, and the timing is such that it's almost definitely the headlamps of the Land Rover returning to this point to leave the mountain, which she saw at 10 o'clock when she arrived 5 miles away. The line of sight always takes you across the top of the crests. If there was something large behind that hill now, even though we're here, we wouldn't be able to see it, simply because our line of sight takes us over the ridge. And that's exactly what happened with the police. So they came away, they went back down the track, they had nothing to report other than that light. On the return trip from having searched up on the tops and found nothing, that commandeered Land Rover came back down here. They met another carload of police going up. They told them there was nothing happening, and they all came down for the night. Of the 23rd, that search was concluded.
Hugh Lloyd, who still lives in the area, spoke to us on our way up the mountain.
Well, the reason they came, they said there was a plane crash on the mountain. So.
Oh, that's what they said, yeah? Okay. And then you drove them up there, I believe?
I drove them up there with a next door neighbour.
Right, right. And what did they do when they got up there?
They just had a look round. We did see a very bright light up there, a very bright light.
Right, and
this is about 40 minutes after the, after the tremor.
Right.
Where we were saw in this light, it was coming from the ground and
from behind the
like
hills that you were
in the valley, like he was falling in the valley, whatever it was coming from the, like.
So if there was an object there, it was out of your view. It was more of a light coming off it.
That's it, yeah.
And what colour would you describe the light as?
Very bright white.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And am I right in saying, as you said before, correct me if I'm wrong, it came up and then receded?
Yeah, that's it. Because when the police saw this light, they thought that must be the plane, and but it, the last movement, it was all.
And when it disappeared, they changed their mind.
Yeah. Did you see it disappear at all or not?
It just died out.
Right, it died out as you saw it, right?
Even on take off, and the thing just died out.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Hugh. Thank you. Very grateful for that. Thanks very much indeed.
A 3-man search and rescue team, which had been requested by the police from RAF Valley in Anglesey, about 70 miles away, they arrived. They bedded down for the night, and first thing the following morning, police and these 3 military men were up on the slopes again, conducting another search. And they only searched this part of the range on Bronwyn Mountain. They searched till just after 2 and called off the search. What's suspicious about that is a good 12 hours have passed, and we have a case whereby the Civil Aviation Authority and the military would well know where they lost the plane. So I thought, well, why have they bothered to conduct a search for something that they know isn't lost?
The most important witness to the alleged UFO is Pat Evans. Pat was a district nurse, and she too felt the earth tremor. Thinking something had crashed in the mountains, she telephoned the police, then decided to set out in her car with her 2 daughters to see if she could find the crash site and offer medical assistance. Pat Evans, however, drove to a different location that the police had searched. She drove towards Berwyn, along the B4391. Because when she spoke to the police, they failed to inform her of the search being carried out by the police on Bronwyn. In a letter she sent in 1991 to a local newspaper, she states, "I remember vividly the tremor in January 74. A telephone call to police headquarters at Colwyn Bay informed me of the possibility of an aeroplane crash on the Berwyn Mountains. Along with my 2 daughters, aged 15 and 14, we drove to the scene. I am a trained nurse and was willing to help. On arriving at the top of the Berwyns, what we saw was a huge orange, circular, brightly glowing, pulsating object, seemingly sitting on the mountainside. We observed it for 10 minutes approximately. Search parties with torches could be seen approaching it. There being no disaster as such, and my daughter's nervousness, we left. The whole incident was played down by the press and TV, and to my mind there was a cover-up. The whole area was sealed off to the public, even local shepherds, for days, maybe longer. We don't know to this day what we saw. I feel it will be 30 years before information is released. On the night in question, I was the only vehicle on the Bala to Llandithnog Mountain Road. My only regret was leaving the area too soon. Llandithnog villagers witnessed sightings of lights coming off the mountain later. In her police witness statement, she provides a rough sketch of what she saw. The Evans testimony is very important to this case. What follows is a brief clip from a previous documentary in which she gives an account of what she saw.
I thought there might be an air crash. Maybe as a nurse we could help giving first aid. So I called to my daughters and we got into the car and we made our way up to the mountain. We drove a fair way along the mountain road, and to our left we could see a huge orange ball sitting on the mountain, glowing.
Yeah, we stopped and we started looking what we thought was going to be an aircraft on fire. Because we'd envisaged sort of, oh God, there might be bodies if it was an aeroplane crash, and we weren't too happy at that prospect, but we were quite surprised to see this big reddish orange ball just sitting there. There were no flames, and it was so uniform. The shape of the round spherical shape of it made us realise we weren't looking at an aircraft. There were no flames jumping, but it was pulsating, this red-orange object that we saw.
And we could see little lights, like fairy lights, coming towards the object in a zigzag pattern, and I assumed at that time possibly there was someone going to see what was what.
With hindsight, we realised that the search party couldn't have got there, located it and got there in the time it had taken us to go from the village up to the mounting.
Yeah.
No one could have organised themselves to get to the object that we saw.
Bear in mind it was drizzling with rain, and the Berwyn Mountains on a dark January night are an inhospitable place, to put it mildly, so mountain searches would have been extremely difficult. We know the police went up Bronwyn Mountain in a Land Rover. There was no record of the police searching the Berwyn Mountain, where Pat Evans witnessed the object. A search team of 3 people was dispatched from RAF Valley, but official reports show they did not arrive in Llandrillo until after midnight, and according to the report, found nothing. So who did the torchlights belong to, which were approaching the object at 9:50 p.m? We will come back to this point later in the film. It's fairly well known that Pat Evans will no longer speak about what she saw that night. Rumours abound that she has been bought off to stop her talking more about the incident. Her testimony is not the only reliable description of this strange object. Although the people of Llandrillo could not see the object Pat Evans saw due to the steep mountains, there was another group of witnesses who did have visibility of the Berwyn Mountain on that evening. At a place called Garth Goch, about 3 miles from where Pat Evans witnessed the object, lived witness Mike Saville with his wife and young child. No previous documentary has featured the testimony from witnesses at this location. The small holding is situated at a higher vantage point than Llandrillo, with a clear view of the tops of the Berwyn mountain range. Although Mike Saville no longer lives at Garth Goch, he travelled up to Wales to be interviewed on location outside his old house, joined by researchers Scott Felton and Margaret Fry.
We were sitting, my wife and I were sitting in the house reading. It was so very quiet, and we heard this, we didn't know what it was at the time, but this tremor coming towards us, and we could feel it almost going under our feet. Shook the house, really did shake the house, and it frightened the life out of us. We didn't know what was going on. So I got my clothes together, came out, I looked out that way, out towards the Berwyns, and I could see light in the air, but I couldn't see anything else, so I walked over to the barn steps, and over the top of the bushes, I could see, well, my wife and, well, I saw it first. It's like a half a sun going down, bright orange. We thought a plane might have crashed, but as soon as we'd seen it, we'd realised there was no flames coming from it. It was a very defined line. At that point, I got my wife to come out and have a look at it. We were sort of quite frightened by it all. We didn't know what was going on. And so we decided to go down to Kai Pant, to the farm below us, to see what, because they were on the phone, and to see what they had to say about it.
It's about 400 yards from here, something like that?
Yeah,
yes,
400 or 500 yards, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
just across the fields.
We got my son out of bed, woke him up, got him out of bed, dressed up all of us because it was a winter's night, got him on the backpack, walked down to the farm. Arthur and Dillis and the children were all up. They had heard it. They had been on the phone to Llandrillo, to relatives there, and the whole village was out, police, and chaos, mayhem sort of thing.
Okay, and you didn't mention the explosion there, Mike. Did you hear an explosion?
No, I didn't. No.
Okay.
No, we didn't know what was going on.
Okay, and how long did you observe the object for, and did it move at all?
No, it was very static, very static. And as I say, we then walked down to the farm. we must have been there 10 or 15 minutes talking with Arthur, and they decided to bring us home. Arthur came up with his son Dowie, and I said, well, come and look at it. So we all stood on the barn steps, and the four of us were watching it. And I'm not quite sure of time scale, but within front of our eyes, it just went down and disappeared, and then it was darkness.
So it actually went down and
Yes.
not up? And
No, it went down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And
That was when it went down onto a lower ridge, although you didn't know that.
That's right.
so you think it actually disappeared behind a mountain? So it was still actually there, just you couldn't observe it from your point of view?
There is...
yes, probably, yes. I don't know. I can't quite say.
Yeah, I've established since then there is a mid-distance hill called Kevin Koch. And the line of sight from this yard, where Mike was looking, goes straight through this ridge. And I've looked at the altitudes, the summits, and in fact, although you're still looking upwards, the line of sight from your eye looking upwards, this object sank behind Kevin Koch Ridge, and it just gave the impression it disappeared, because in the darkness of the night, you couldn't see the ridge in front of the blackness of the mountains behind anyway, and all it did was just sank behind that and went out of view.
And how many witnesses were actually standing here, Mike, on that particular night?
There's Arthur, Dowie, Mary Ann, my wife, and myself.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So you were how old at the time, Mike?
24.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And, you know, if we were to interview your wife at the time, she agrees with everything you've just said.
Absolutely, yeah, and she's the lady that would tell me if I was wrong. Right. She's got one of those memories that goes back to when she was 3 years old, that sort of thing.
Right.
We also spoke to the farmer, Leon Pritchard, who still lives at the neighbouring farm. Leon's parents witnessed the object with Mike Saville, but Leon himself was outside of the immediate area at the time. He returned later that evening and was told about the event. We're at the farm, which is about 400 yards away from where Mike Saville originally saw the UFO, and we're with Leon Pritchard, who wasn't here at that time, but actually came into the village of Llandrithno shortly after the event took place. Were you told anything when you got back here to the farm?
Well, only there'd been a tremor, and that Mick and Mary Ann had come down here from Garthgoch. Because they witnessed something from Garthgoch.
And did you feel the tremor where you were at that time?
No, because we were travelling.
Right.
That we didn't feel anything.
Okay. So your father and your brother, you've been told, went out with Mike to witness the object, and did they describe it to you at all? What they saw? With Mike?
Yes. So like what Mike said, this ball of fire. Or ball of light was on the side of the mountain. One witness, my mother's friend at the time, I remember speaking to her a few days later, and she saw this light rising from the mountain and going along the top of the mountain like this, and just disappearing.
Was this on the same night then?
On the same night, yeah.
The good thing about this yard and the front door of the house is that it's rectangular.
Right.
And the line of sight as you come out the door is naturally confined to this narrow corridor.
Okay.
And it was a simple matter of drawing a line across Google Earth and copying it onto a map.
Right.
And the parameters of the line of sight that Pat Evans had, and where they bisect is where the UFO must have been.
We've just left the location where Mike Saville witnessed the UFO. We're now on the B4391 on the route that Pat Evans took. Okay, we've just pulled over now, which is the point where Pat Evans stopped when she observed the circular craft.
Well, this is where Mrs. Evans and Mr. Evans brought me in 1991 and stopped right here. The fencing was down then, and they pointed out to me that lighter field there, and they said that this object was sitting just on the ridge above.
I'm just standing with Scott Felton here, and we're standing at the point where Pat Evans stopped her car and got out with her 2 daughters, and we've got an Ordnance Survey map, and Scott's going to point out Pat's line of sight on this Ordnance Survey map.
Yeah, this is the B4391 from Bala and Llanderfel, where Pat Evans lived. She travelled up this road. At this point where we are now, she stopped for 5 minutes to look at the object across the way on the hill there in the pitch black of the night, and then after 5 minutes she went along the road to the county boundary, turned round, returned to this spot and spent about another 10 minutes looking at the object before departing for home. But this line is her line of sight straight across the mountain, roughly towards the summit of Moelsych. That's a sub-peak of Cadair Berwyn. And this faint line across the map here is the perfectly aligned line from the yard at Garth Goch, which was Mike Saville's place.
Okay.
This is the point of intersection on the mountain. There's absolutely no dispute about the line of sight, both lines of sight, which means that within allowing for a little bit of variation, within a couple of 100 square yards, that is the point on the mountain where the UFO sat.
Okay.
The actual point of intersection on this mountain slope here is, you've got this bit of forestry down here. You can draw a line.
Let me zoom in on that bit of forestry. Okay, yeah.
You draw a line up the face of the forestry there.
Okay, yeah.
Up the grassy slopes. It levels out slightly just below where that scree and heather starts. That's the blackened patches, the dark patches.
Yes, yes.
And the peak of Cadair Berwyn is in the background, a lot further on again.
Yep.
Where the UFO sat on the ground, or presumably on the ground, just below those dark patches. And as you can see, it's a clear view. Anyone who was here would have a commanding view of that object.
And of course, as you can see, it's a very, very bleak, and it must have been really bleak in winter time and very dark. And then they drove on to the hidden car park there, which we'll be going to shortly, and turned around then, and then they came home. It takes about 15 minutes, I think, or 15 to 20 minutes from her house to here.
Right. I mean, other than the Evans and the party that was here with Mike, are there any other witnesses?
Not necessarily all of the people who told me about it actually saw it themselves. They'd been told by their uncle or aunt or cousin or whatever, you know, who had been, who had actually been up this track, as they said, and seen this thing through a forested area, they said, and they could see it through the trees, sitting on the ridge of the mountain. Unfortunately, Scott and I have never been able to find out which track these people went up or where they saw it from. At first I used to think it was the same area that Mike is living in, but I don't think it was.
So this is a third group of witnesses then?
Yes, that's right. Quite irrespective of Pat Evans and Mike and his neighbours.
Mike Saville viewed the object at a different angle to that of Pat Evans. According to Scott Felton's Ordnance Survey map, their lines of sight were at 85 degrees to each other. Two different perspectives of the object at slightly different times. They both describe the object as circular in shape. We can conclude then that they were probably seeing a spherical object. Pat Evans describes in her statement that the object she viewed was comparable in size to the moon, which we know was below the horizon. According to the map, she was 2,530 meters away from the object. Using this basic data, it is possible to get a reasonable estimate of the size of the object. When looking at the moon from Earth, the angle subtended to your eye is half a degree. In other words, if you draw two lines from your eye, one to the top of the moon and one to the bottom, the resulting angle is half a degree. This means if you view an object which appears to be the same size as the moon, for example by placing an apple in front of you so it appears the same size as the the angle subtended by the apple is the same, ½ degree. Simple trigonometry shows that an object placed at a distance of 2,530 metres, i.e. the distance of the object viewed by Pat Evans, which subtends the same angle, would be 22 metres in diameter. If we now look at the sketch which was copied by a police officer from Pat Evans' original sketch, it is suggesting the object was slightly smaller than the moon. To allow for this, if we reduce the size by 30%, we arrive at a figure in the order of 15 metres in diameter. This was not a small object. Let's just illustrate what a 15-metre diameter glowing sphere would look like next to these houses. Now that we have an idea of the size of this object, let's recap on the timing of the events. The officially recorded time of the explosion was 8:38 p.m. Mike Saville came out of his house a few minutes later.
As far as I'm concerned, between sort of it happening and getting ourselves together and going down the farm and coming back here, I would have thought it must have been 40 minutes, 3/4 of an hour.
Right. And we know it disappeared from sight about 20:09. Which ties in with your 3/4 of an hour. Yeah. And what it was effectively doing was landing and behind the hill, and once it went out of their vision, it was gone. Pat Evans left their house about 20 to 10. It was 10 o'clock, or just about 10 o'clock, when Pat Evans discovered it. So 35 minutes later.
She stopped for 5 minutes to look at the object across the way on the hill there, in the pitch black of the night, and then after 5 minutes she went along the road to the county boundary, turned round, returned to this spot, and spent about another 10 minutes looking at the object before departing for home.
A little village called Llangonog, which is the next village along that very road that Pat Evans was on. I got told of a witness in that village who claims she saw what she called a UFO flying over their village, heading towards the English border at 10:20. Pat Evans, a few days later, said she was sorry she didn't actually stay a bit longer because she'd heard, through other people I expect, that the UFO had departed about 10 minutes after she'd left the scene. So that ties in with that 10-minute time frame, and this other witness a few miles down the road saying she saw this thing pass over their village.
So in total, we've got the UFO as being on the mountainside for about 1 hour and 40 minutes in total.
Oh yeah, it was there for quite some time.
That night, locals in Llandrillo were perplexed to see a significant military presence arrive in their remote village. Just 50 minutes after the explosion, Leon Pritchard arrived back in the village at 9:30 p.m, returning by car from a welding course.
Well, we were coming home from the Bala, direction of Bala, and as soon as we arrived in Llandrillo, we were aware of something was going on, because it was mayhem really, because a lot of police cars and army trucks in the village, which was very unusual.
Were there any police as well as army then?
There was police there, not in as heavy numbers as the army though.
Okay, and how many army would you estimate that you saw?
Well, I saw 2 trucks. That's all I saw, because they were stopping. Presumably they'd gone up the mountain to do whatever they wanted to do, and they were stopping everybody else.
So they were stopping cars?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
The other thing that I could say is that evening there was a propeller engine plane droning up and down the Berwyns, up and down, up and down.
Before or after?
Afterwards.
Right.
And it seemed to be, I don't know, I can't remember what time we went to bed, but for sure it was going up and down, up and down.
Okay.
A propeller type plane, not a jet.
The sudden appearance of the army suggests that armed forces were already conducting exercises in the area on that night before the time of the explosion, as it would have been impossible for the army to be contacted, dispatched and travelled by road to the village within 50 minutes. In her research, UFO investigator Margaret Fry has uncovered further witnesses who observed military vehicles on the night of the incident. In 1996, Dave Roberts contacted Margaret explaining that he had been living with his mother in the small hamlet of Glenduffrey on the A5, 8 miles northeast of Llandrillo, when they heard the huge explosion and earth tremor on the 23rd of January 1974. Between 9 and 9:30 p.m. they heard rumbling noises and looked out to see closed military vehicles passing through their hamlet heading west towards Llandrillo. This ties in with Leon Pritchard's sightings of military vehicles in Llandrillo. They stayed awake to watch for further vehicles, as this was such an unusual happening in this remote location. Over the years, Margaret has held yearly meetings in the area to find new witnesses. Several other witnesses at these meetings have confirmed to Margaret that they saw military vehicles heading towards the Berwyns that night.
Well, Margaret Fry has had reports in the past, just a couple of days or so after the incident when the UFO was on the mountain. A witness, who I don't know who it is, apparently came past here and saw an army wagon in this little hidden car park. A couple of soldiers milling about, and somewhere here were 2 more soldiers, 4 soldiers in total, 2 each carrying a box off the mountainside here.
Let's now look at the scientific evidence which has been put forward to suggest that an earthquake took place that night. I obtained a copy of the report by the British Geological Survey. Doubt is cast immediately before one even begins to read the first page with the title, "The Enigmatic Bala Earthquake." Enigmatic meaning not clear to the understanding, perplexing or mysterious. I showed the report to an expert who has a PhD in geology. After reading the report, he contacted me and wanted to point out certain aspects. He drew my attention to a map shown in the report of the stations used to measure the seismic activity. The triangles show the locations where seismic measuring equipment recorded the tremor. In 1974, there was no measuring station within 150 miles of Llandrillo. Here is a trace from the report of what was recorded at one of the stations. The geologist explained to me that it is impossible to determine from this trace whether it was caused by an impacting object or from an earthquake. He then went on to explain how the center of the tremor is determined using the data from each measuring station. They simply compare the relative magnitudes of the seismic activity at each station, and based on this triangulate the most likely position of the source. The size of the tremor measured at each station is not necessarily indicative of the distance. Factors such as the type of intervening rock come into play. In summary, it was impossible to locate the epicenter of this event with any accuracy using the seismic data. The second method the seismologists used to determine the epicenter is to send out questionnaires to the public. They then plot the results of the survey on a map using a scale of 1 to 5 regarding how strongly people felt the tremor. This map from the report shows the intensities felt by local people, 5 being the strongest. The circle shown in the center is about 15 miles across. The report mentions 2 previous geological studies of this event, one done in 1980 by Burton and Nielsen, who determined the epicenter was likely to be here, one done in 1988 by Turbot and Innes, who determined the epicenter was likely to be here, and this report, which determined the epicenter was likely to be here. This map is important to our investigation, as we shall see later in the film. The geologist drew my attention to this table, which he thought was highly ambiguous. The table gives 2 estimates of the depth of the tremor, derived from the 1980 and 1988 reports. Before I explain the table, I need to explain standard deviation. When using data of a statistical nature where a value cannot be specified exactly, scientists give a figure along with that figure's error, expressed in terms of its standard deviation. For example, if the scientist said the earthquake depth was 100 meters, with a standard deviation of 10 meters, we can show this on a normal distribution graph. We put the mean figure of 100 metres in the middle, with +1 standard deviation, 110 metres, and -1 standard deviation, 90 metres. What the graph is showing is we are not certain what the depth was, but can be 68% sure the depth was between 90 and 110 metres. If we go to 2 standard deviations, we can be 95% sure the depth was between 80 and 120 metres, and so on. Now let's look at the depths described in the table and put them on the normal distribution graph. The first report states 15 kilometres as the depth, but does not give a standard deviation figure. The second gives 7.5 kilometres as the depth and 12.5 kilometres as the standard deviation. Incidentally, both these depths are extremely shallow for an earthquake. Any earthquake less than 70 kilometres is considered shallow. If we put the data on a normal distribution graph, it doesn't really make any sense. It is suggesting there is a 68% chance that the tremor occurred at a depth between -5 kilometres and 20 kilometres. -5 kilometres, in other words, above the surface. Surely not. The geologist agreed after studying the report there is no conclusive evidence whatsoever that an earthquake occurred. In light of the other factors involved, namely the army presence and the witness testimony, the most likely cause of the tremor, in my personal opinion, was an impact. If this is the case, this does not necessarily mean the object witnessed by Pat Evans and Mike Saville was the impacting object, although that is one possibility. It's also possible that the object descended in response to whatever impacted moments earlier. In order to get more information, we decided to drive along the floor of the valley and knock on the doors of the farms and houses between Llandrithlo and the Berwyn Mountain. In our investigation, we were informed by a local that a military unit hired and occupied an outhouse building as a base camp for a duration of between 6 and 8 weeks following the explosion. We went along to this outhouse to see if we could locate the owner. This seemed like a promising lead. I informed Scott Felton about the claims of an army unit using the outhouse. Scott made some Freedom of Information request inquiries, but to no avail. He then managed to contact the previous owners of the cottage, who told him the army did not use the outhouse in 1974, but had rented it in the 1980s after a plane crash.
It's just like an old workshop.
So this turned out to be a dud lead. Scott has made many contacts in and around Llandrithlo during his research. One of the locals, who he believes to be reliable, has given him information from a witness who Scott believes lived in a small holding on the foot of the valley below Berwyn. Scott has a good idea of who this witness is, but we cannot name them as we have not had the identity confirmed and the witness does not want to be named. But the witness wanted it to be known that on the night in question, a soldier who had been on the Berwyn Mountain in response to the event walked from the side of the mountain to the witness's property. The soldier then asked if he could use the family's telephone, as he explained the army's radios on the mountainside were not working. The soldier may well have been a member of the same team that Pat Evans witnessed when she saw torchlights at 10 p.m. We know from Scott's map within a few hundred metres where the object was, and we also know the locations of the nearest small holdings. Scott believes he knows which house the soldier called at, but we cannot name it as the individual insists we do not identify them. We decided to walk from the foot of the valley where the small holdings are located up to the spot where the object was sighted, thus retracing the path of the soldier who came to use the phone. We drove as far as physically possible in the car before making the rest of the journey on foot.
Which is the same side that the UFO was spotted on. So we're gonna go. Oh, bloody hell! This vehicle is not made for this road. Jesus. Right. So there's a farmhouse up there. That, yeah, this is going over the river. So cross your fingers.
probably going to get a very strange look when we arrive at this farmhouse. Okay, as we drive up. This is Pat Oldfield, who lives... What's the name of this house, Pat?
Blaen y Pennant.
Okay, and we reckon this is the last house along the line of the river, on the side of the river where the UFO is believed to have come down against the side of the mountain. So Pat's just informed us that she walks her dog up this path. So we're going to go and have a look at it, see if we can read anything into it, and then perhaps climb a little bit further up the side of the mountain and just sort of survey where the craft is alleged to have landed. If we keep walking through this forest, we should get to the end of the trees. When we come out of this forest, we should be able to see the B4391, and we'll be almost at the spot where the UFO came down. We continued along the track towards the open land where the object was sighted. But before we reached the end of the trees, came across an interesting feature. Right, we walked to the end of this path, which is right at the edge of the forest, just before the spot where the UFO came down. Now, we found this geological feature, you might call it, at the end of the path. It's very intriguing. It may just be a geological feature, but there's a huge sort of almost a crater in the side of this hill here, and there should be open land here where we should be able to see the road. Right, it looks like there's light at the end of the tunnel, thank God, because it's pretty spooky in these woods. Right, we've come out in the edge of the woods, and these stones here are all they're marked on the Ordnance Survey. So the point we need to be is just up this hill a little bit. So we're going to nip over this fence here. This is not the sort of terrain you would normally go walking out on. Extremely steep hill which has rocks all over it, and there was a suggestion years ago that the UFO was a poacher's tent. Anyone camping on this land would be absolutely out of their mind on a cold January evening. Nearly there. Okay. Oh, some snow over there. Right. So we've reached a ridge. Okay. There's the end of the line of trees. We can see the road. This is the road that Pat Evans viewed the UFO from. See, there's a van there. There are no roads. It's completely inaccessible. So it would have took the army some time to climb up this hill. And like I say, their radios didn't work. Why didn't they work? I can safely say there's not many people been to this UFO landing site. And we're retracing our steps back to the first available farmhouse. I'm very curious about this huge indentation in this hillside, which is not far from the alleged UFO landing site. A groove running round it, and I have made some calculations on what Pat Evans said, that the UFO was approximately 15 meters wide. This could just be a perfectly normal geological, you know, phenomenon or whatever, but there's a definite groove. There's a groove, you can see, running around here. What is this? So it's actually indented, semicircular. If I step up there, you can see. We need to get a metal detector. Could be significant. I'd love to come back and dig it all up. And we're just retracing our steps back down, and you can just imagine the army guy coming down here frantically, a bit worried because the radios aren't working, trying to find a house with a phone. Okay, we're coming back down to the house. The circular opening in the trees became the centre of great curiosity for myself and Scott Felton. The immediate thought was, could this be an impact crater? I contacted a PhD geologist whose specific expertise was in impact crater formation. I sent him images and video of what we were now referring to as the anomaly. He could not ascertain from the images if the anomaly was formed by an impact. Seemingly, to identify an impact crater is not straightforward. It is a process of elimination. One needs to rule out all of the possible other causes of such a geological feature before concluding it's an impact crater. This would require a detailed geological study of the area, something which was beyond our budget. One suggestion is the anomaly is merely a turning circle placed at the end of the track for vehicles. We have tentatively ruled this out due to the acute angles where the circle meets the track. Comparing it to a turning circle located nearby, the two are rather different. We couldn't see any evidence of vehicles having used this as a turning point. I then looked at the official seismic report discussed earlier, which shows the epicentral determinations of the supposed earthquake. Incredibly, the anomaly is located very near the 3 previous estimates of the earthquake epicenters. Could this anomaly really be the impact crater of a falling object, which was heard as an explosion and caused the earth tremor? Anyone wanting to study the crater or look it up on Google Earth, here are the geographical coordinates of the site. We wanted to find out what year the trees surrounding the anomaly had been planted. Ordnance survey maps are periodically updated. Looking at 2 maps of the area, one from the 1960s and one from the early 1980s, we can see the trees where the anomaly is located are newer than the rest of the woodland. In other words, the patch of woodland surrounding the anomaly was planted more recently, probably in the 1970s. We wanted to find the exact year these trees were planted. Scott Felton has written several times to the company responsible for managing the forest to try and determine when the trees were planted.
But the forests came under the jurisdiction of a company called Till Hill Forestry, which is a national company. But there's a local office for Till Hill. It's Palais Hall, which is near Llanderfel. And I don't like to mention UFOs when I write to people because some people just get upset about it, they get put off or whatever. I just sent a random email, non-specific, just making an inquiry about when that particular wood was planted, the type of trees, and I threw a few other things in around it, place name meanings and things like that, just to give myself the impression I was just a general inquirer, member of the public.
Yes.
And the first thing I got was an email back, basically saying in no uncertain terms, why did I want to know? Sort of thing, you know. The guy who sent that email, he wasn't refusing to give the information at that point, but I just wrote back and I said, well, you know, I've just got this interest and I want to settle an argument, like mates in a pub and whatever. And that was that. Got no more response from him whatsoever. But I think now what he actually done is Google my name, realised there was a UFO connection, and it's just point blank. But I find it incredible that a company just wouldn't even bother to say, well, it's this species, it's conifer tree, and it was planted in this year. I mean, it's just ludicrous not to. And I mean, there's other ways of finding out. To me, it suggests that they may have something to hide, or they know something. But I believe this woodland, there's a whole area of woodland around, but it was all planted at the same time. All these trees are all the same age, but this little piece of woodland around about this anomaly, as we call it, is a lot younger. It was, I would imagine it was post 23rd of January 1974.
Yes, but we don't know exactly.
But we don't know the exact date.
The company has still not revealed the actual date the trees were planted, but we do believe it was in the mid-1970s. Could these trees have been planted to cover up an impact site? In order to search for evidence, we returned to the anomaly with metal detectors. Scott just so happens to be very experienced using metal detectors, having run his own metal detection club in the past. Right, we've returned to the side of the Berwyn mountain, and it was 10.5 months since I was last here, and we've come along with Scott Felton today, and what we want to do is Scott's brought a metal detector, and we're going to search the area to see if we can find any fragments, because we're still unsure about this place where we're standing.
It's a good site because there's very, very little soil, so there's no depth for anything to get lost in. So if there's anything metallic here, assuming what we're looking for is metallic, if it's metallic, the metal detector will pick it up. We don't have to worry about it being faint signals deep down in the soil, because there's no soil. We're literally on the bedrock here.
Right.
For whatever reason, when this was made or created, whatever terminology you want to use, it's right down to the bedrock.
Right.
There's nothing left.
And
whatever was gone from here seems to have been extracted and removed.
Right. And outside of this circular area, we've got very densely packed trees on this very, very steep slope here, and steep slope down there.
I was suspicious about this particular wood because all the surrounding forestry, and there's acres of it. It's all much older, but this appears just after the UFO event.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll only know by doing some metal detection. So let's get cracking. Okay, I'm standing on top of the ledge at the anomaly now, and Scott's just bang in the middle of the circular anomaly, and I'll just pan round, and this is the sort of wall which is or the side which is it's about 12 feet high, and I'm just standing on top. It's quite difficult to film this because it's difficult to get an appreciation of the shape without actually being here. We really need an aerial shot. And after we've searched this central area, we're then going to search the surrounding trees. Because if there was an impacting object which created this anomaly, there would have been bits flying all over the place. So Scott was just saying that if this area has been sort of hollowed out by man, if you like, then the topsoil isn't here and it's been removed. And the actual slope here it's probably about 12 feet up, and you can see there just behind Scott's head where there's a part of the hill missing, if you like. So if the earth has been removed from here, then it's a vast amount of earth, and it will have contained a lot of rocks, because there's a lot of rock under this earth, Scott.
Well, if you see the slope, it's the whole wood's on a slope, and this slope coming down is a continuation of the slope on the other side of the excavation. Same there, straight down. So this is basically a ledge, taken out of the slope.
Yes.
But the only thing is, what's missing is the spoil.
Yeah.
We would expect to throw it down there and build it up or whatever.
Right,
it's just not there.
So we're going to move on and do some metal detection on the surrounding forest area. Right, we've just moved from where we were before in this circular anomaly, and we're in the woods or the forest, and Scott's just going to scan the area right the way around. This is a pretty steep hill that we're on in the middle of this forest. Right, we've now worked our way around to below the anomaly in a circular fashion. So we're just at the foot of this embankment here.
Silver paper.
Silver paper. We've just spent the last 4 hours searching above and below and to the side of the anomaly, and we found two 1 pence pieces and a piece of tin foil and a few crisp packets and a can of iron brew. So not very successful, Scott, but at least we've sort of
you know, we've done the search, so there's nothing obvious under the ground.
No, the soil's very shallow. There's not much that could hide. If there's anything to be found, it'll be within an inch of the surface. So,
okay, all right. So we're now going to officially call off the search.
We are still unsure whether this site has any relevance to the events in 1974, but its location, the planting of trees, and its size suggests that it might be. Further investigation is required. Having covered a lot of the evidence of this case, here is a summary of the most likely scenario of the events. On the evening of the 23rd of January 1974, an active army unit was on standby somewhere within 20 miles east of Llandrillo, probably stationed at Llangollen. At 8:38 p.m, a large object impacted on the side of the Berwyn mountain, and the army was immediately dispatched to seal off the area and possibly recover debris. Locals were kept away from the impact site by roadblocks. Shortly after the impact, a massive red-orange glowing pulsating sphere approximately 15 meters in diameter was witnessed by at least 7 witnesses, seemingly resting on the side of the mountain. Due to the terrain, neither the impact site nor the object was visible from the nearest town, Llandrillo. The object remained on the mountain for an hour and 40 minutes before taking off and disappearing. While the object was still on the mountain, the army unit approached it carrying torchlights. We don't know if the orange sphere was the impacting object or whether the sphere came down in response to another impacting object. This is a summary of what most likely happened. This then begs the question, did the military deliberately shoot something down? If they did, this would certainly explain why there appears to have been a cover-up of the event. Over the years, there has been evidence to suggest that authorities have been trying to cover up and muddle up the facts by making misleading television documentaries and putting out false information in the media.
From what I understand, these 5, should we call them gentlemen, were in a car travelling on the road between Llanderfel and Llandrillo, the B4401, yeah. And at some point, allegedly came across the military clearing up a UFO crash. I find that hard to believe because if it was a UFO crash, they literally would have sealed the place off. But these guys were there, they saw what was going on, they claimed to have seen a craft being taken or loaded onto a lorry, and I think they even went so far as to say that there were aliens involved, dead and alive. But the story goes back a little bit further than that, because in documents that they eventually supplied and passed on into the public domain, should we say, there were claims of a military exercise at sea, in the Irish Sea, where 2 UFOs were forced out of the water, apparently near Puffin Island, which is off the coast of Anglesey, which is, again, totally ludicrous because the water's just feet deep, and when the tide goes out twice a day, it's dry sandbanks. You couldn't possibly get a warship into such shallow water. But anyway, these 2 UFOs were forced out the water. There was some engagement took place with one of them, and this particular UFO was fired upon and damaged. As I say, I've not seen the documents, so from a scientific point of view, it might be wrong to totally diss it, but on the face of it, my conclusion at the moment would be that it's a total load of disinformation. Someone else who's got a studio, I think it's a film studio in Conwy in North Wales, he told Margaret Fry, he said that he'd known for years, he said that it was a total fabrication, and it was concocted by some people in a pub.
Right.
Looking into it, we got people who've gone along that road all evening. We know of one witness who was coming back from a welding course. Now, he drove along that road at 9:30, just before 9:30, and he saw no obstructions. There was nothing, there was no roadblocks, nothing like that. Although, of course, when he arrived in Llandrillo, there were military and police all milling about.
The story about 5 gentlemen in a car seeing a crashed UFO by the side of the road along with alien bodies is not backed up by any witnesses who drove along the same road that night. The source of this story is from a single individual, and the 5 gentlemen have never been identified or come forward. The information is therefore likely to be disinformation.
Well, it's an old trick, isn't it? Tell a true story, but make it look stupid.
Yes.
And then everyone turns against the story.
In January 2011, just a few weeks after Scott Felton started submitting Freedom of Information requests regarding the Army's use of the outhouse at Tai Nant, an article appeared in the Sun newspaper, sporting the usual silly cartoon image of a flying saucer. The article contains an important error. It states that Hugh Lloyd went up the Berwyn mountain in a Land Rover. This is not true. As we have already explained, he went up Bronwyn, which was over 2 miles away from where the object was located. The Sun's article also alludes to the far-fetched 5 gentlemen seeing aliens story. UFO investigators in the UK claim to have spoken to witnesses who were in the Berwyn Mountains that night and claim to have seen alien beings emerging dazed from a crashed spaceship. To our knowledge, there are no first-hand eyewitness accounts of a crashed spaceship or alien beings. It seems the UFO muddle-up was in full swing with the help of Britain's most popular newspaper, read by millions of people every day. In books which have been written by UFO skeptics, they claim that there was no military involvement during this event other than the RAF Valley Unit, which didn't get there until after midnight. These researchers are incorrect in stating this. There was a significant military presence in Llanrithro village within 50 minutes of the explosion. We might ask ourselves, firstly, how could anybody possibly know there was no military presence? And secondly, why are these skeptics so keen to try and rewrite the events such that the military were not involved? Is it possible these authors are part of the establishment cover-up and muddle-up? In 2008, Channel 5 screened a documentary about the Berwyn Mountain UFO case.
There are other researchers have looked into this case and made documentaries about it. And did they come to this spot? Did they film at this spot?
Never.
No. And I just want to ask, Mike, have you seen any of the TV programmes that have been produced about this case?
I've seen one, yes.
You've seen one, and then, I mean...
Made them very angry.
Yes, yeah.
So could you tell us, you know...
Well, I was quite outraged.
Really?
Well, yes, because it sort of almost made us out to be sort of fabricators, liars and things like that.
Right.
And I waited all my life to say this and put it down on, sort of film.
Yeah, yeah.
Actually what happened.
Uh-huh. Scott Felton, being a leading researcher of the case, was approached by Firefly Productions to take part in their film.
Well, originally, like most enquiries, they just turned up and got in touch and said they were doing this programme. It coincided again with the release of government files. And as I understand it, a large chunk of Berwyn UFO files were supposed to be being released, or at least a section of what they had. And the series was covering the half dozen or so most significant UK cases, yes, which just wouldn't go away. Mm-hmm. I thought no more about it. It seemed quite good. I would go along with it. I made specific requests that I don't do programmes with certain other people in them who I regard as debunkers. Mm-hmm. And I was assured that the people I named wouldn't even be in it. It was a case of, well, you know a bit about this case. Yeah. It'll be more or less your show sort of thing. The programme makers came along. They spent a week more or less in the Llanrithro area. They were interviewing other people who I did know about, witnesses and things like that. And I spent the best part of 2 days with them. I took them up onto the Berwyn Mountains. I showed them where the UFO was, or where I believed it was. I showed them all the evidence to show how I had come to arrive at those conclusions, where the UFO was. I showed them some documents. Well, on the second day of the filming, with the place they were staying at, the B&B place they stayed at, a little hotel. They used one of the rooms and they were sitting people down a bit like I am now. Yes. Just going over certain things. So there was an indoor and outdoor I didn't know anything till the day before the programme was going to be aired. The director of the film crew, I think it was Ian Leveson, not David Leveson, I think it was said earlier.
Right.
He rang me up and left a voicemail on my phone, and he said, the good news is the programme's being aired tomorrow. The bad news is you're not in it.
Right.
And then he went briefly on to explain that the commissioning editor of Channel 5 had pulled all the stuff.
Your stuff?
All my stuff, yeah.
Right. The commissioning editor of Channel 5?
The commissioning editor of Channel 5.
Having left out Scott Felton's entire contribution from their film, let's take a look at how one researcher whose contribution was left in the film attempted to explain the event.
During Jenny Randall's investigations into the Berwyn case, she claims to have witnessed light emanating from the ground, which would fit exactly the same description.
On one of the occasions when I was actually there doing this investigation, I was quite surprised to see one of these earthlights for myself. It was emerging from within the rocks itself and climbing into the sky. But if that was an earthlight, and that was what was seen on the night of this particular occasion, I can well understand why the much greater forces that might have been involved at the time of an earthquake would have generated huge glowing lights that would have been of great fascination to the local people, and why they would have thought that they'd seen something very strange indeed.
The disgraceful treatment by mainstream media of Scott Felton does not end there.
A researcher for the Roy Noble programme, BBC Radio Wales. It's a daily programme that goes out in the mornings. A researcher called Bethan Jones contacted me by email on a Friday and asked me would I take part in a programme the following Tuesday. The government had released some files, and 30 odd of those files were relevant to North Wales sightings. And I hadn't actually read the files at that point, so I told her I'd need to read up on them. Mm-hmm. And in principle I agreed to do the programme. It would have only been a 10-minute slot on the following Tuesday morning. It all came about, the weekend came, I read up on the files and that. And other emails were exchanged, and then on the Monday I sent an email back querying what I might actually be asked, rather than get suddenly jumped on with a question I wasn't sure about. And then there was a bit of silence, and then I got a phone call where previously, what was strange previously, it had all been by email. Then I got a phone call. Bethan Jones, the researcher, said she wanted to talk about the UFO sightings, but she specifically asked not to speak about the Berwyn UFO. Well, of course, that's my forte. Okay. And for me, it's the most important UFO case in Wales. And I said, well, you can't have this sort of conversation without this. You can't just exclude it. And it was a case of, well, we'll get back in touch with you. And a while later, another email said, time was against us and we found someone else to do the show. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was strange, because they hadn't actually previously had anyone else, and they had plenty of time. They only asked me on the Friday, so they must have known on the Friday they had plenty of time. So I left it at that, and as far as I was concerned, I wasn't on the show. Right. And then early next morning, I think it was about 8:30 on the Tuesday morning, the day of the programme, Margaret Fry, who I know very well, got in touch and said that the BBC had contacted her on the Monday and asked her would she do the very same radio interview. Clearly we put two and two together then. They'd excluded me because I didn't want to, I wanted to talk about the Berwyn, they didn't want it. But interestingly, Margaret Fry actually hadn't seen these files or read them, but she said she'd talk about UFOs in North Wales, and then she was asked not to speak about the Berwyn. She'd talk about anything you want, but not the Berwyn. She obviously contacted me and said, it's your baby sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's over. Is there anything you want me to say? And that's when we realised that I've been sort of screwed by the BBC. Yeah, well, in the case of Andy Roberts, he's written this thing called the Welsh Roswell. What part of that report, Andy states categorically that he'd had access to documents, files, records, maps in the British Geological Survey. It hadn't been touched for a couple of decades, 20 odd years. And he seemed to suggest he was the first one to see this sort of stuff, and that might be true. But once he'd actually mentioned this information publicly, I thought, well, I want a slice of that. And I wrote to the British Geological Survey. It was the Nottingham office, but I think it was transferred to Edinburgh. And I was stonewall from day one. Right. I didn't get any replies. I wrote again, didn't get any replies. And this was like going on over a period of 2 years.
Yes.
And in the end, they were just general inquiries to start with. In the end, I got that fed up. I filed a Freedom of Information request against the British Geological Survey for the same information. And it was a case of the information you'd asked for, we haven't got, sort of thing. And then the British Geological Survey tried to blag me with a load of stuff about it's going to cost so many pounds to produce this, which seemed to be contrary to what the Act said you were allowed to be charged for. And it just seemed to be all stalling stuff all the time, stall. And in the end, I got that fed up. There was a Dr. Roger Musson, who seemed to be the main agitator. He seemed to be in charge of...
He was featured in the Channel 5 documentary, I believe.
Yeah, I was quite surprised when he turned up.
All right.
They wheeled out all the veteran debunkers in that programme. But in the end, I got that fed up. I filed a complaint against...
So you still hadn't had any maps by this time?
No, absolutely nothing. But I've been told that these maps and things didn't exist.
By Musson?
By Musson, yeah. And they also denied that they'd ever received my previous inquiries. Yet one of the BGS staff in one letter wrote to me and said, we note that you contacted us in 2006. Yeah. But yeah, then they refuted that I'd actually ever contacted them at all.
Right.
So I went mad about that. I filed a complaint. One of the directors launched an investigation, and then, as might be expected, he did defend the staff, trying to say, well, it's just a bit of a cock-up, really, blah, blah, blah. But they suddenly supplied maps and things which had been stonewalled for 2 years on, and which had been claimed didn't even exist, even though Andy Roberts had openly and publicly claimed he'd had access to this very information. There's certain references on those maps which suggest that there actually are several other maps.
Yes.
And I asked for them all, and I got 2. And I believe even one of those had been tampered with.
Yes.
Assuming I've got the same maps as certain debunkers, I've got the same maps, they must have access to that very same information. And this map clearly shows, and it gives a reference number for the position, it clearly shows poachers, it's clearly marked, and they're on a certain mountain at a certain point, Cadabronman Mountain, yet in the debunking literature, they were moved 4 miles to a neighbouring mountain, and a cock and bull story about meeting up with poachers with a lamp, and trying to pass off this poacher's lamp as the light seen by Pat Evans.
I mentioned earlier that the question arises, did the military shoot something down? If you think this is unlikely, I would draw your attention to the well-documented Milton Torres UFO case from 1957. When a US Air Force fighter jet pilot was ordered by British RAF Fighter Command to fire his full salvo of 42 Mighty Mouse missiles at a UFO which had been seen on radar above Ipswich and had moved out over the North Sea. There is nothing to suggest the policy of the British military to fire at unidentified flying objects in 1957 was any different to the policy 17 years later in 1974. This act of aggression, if it happened, certainly would explain the attempts by media shills to pretend this was not a military operation. Finally, I would like to finish with an appeal. The soldiers who were involved in the operation will be in their 60s by now. If you were one of these soldiers, or know of one of them, please get in touch with myself in total confidence by contacting the RichPlanet.net website.
It's a great way to spend a late Tuesday afternoon on a deserted mountainside in a forest in the middle of Wales.